All right, students, I will be picking up where I left off on the end of page 61 on to page 62. So here again, we know that Brian realizes that he needs food because he's really hungry, and he's decided that he should probably try to find some berries. Um, and the picture that you see there are the berries that Brian will find. So, kind of little spoiler alert. Yes, Brian will find berries. You probably figured that out already. And those berries that he finds are called choke berries, not because he chokes on them, but you'll see why he calls them that in upcoming chapters. All right, so I'm going to start now at the top of page 62. So, Brian sees tall bushes and guesses there are berries there. The sun was still high, and that meant that he had some time before darkness to find berries. He didn't want to be away from he almost thought of it as home, shelter when it came to be dark. He didn't want to be anywhere in the woods when it came to be dark. And he didn't want to get lost, which was a real problem. All he knew in the world was the lake in front of him and the hill at his back and the ridge. If he lost sight of them, there was a really good chance that he would get turned around and not find his way back. So he had to look for berry bushes, but keep the lake or the rock ridge in sight at all times. He looked up the lake shore to the north. For a good distance, perhaps 200 yards, it was fairly clear. There were tall pines, the kind with no limbs until very close to the top, with a gentle breeze sighing in them, but not too much low brush. 200 yards up, there seemed to be a belt of thick, lower brush starting, about 10 or 12 feet high, and that formed a wall he could not see through. It seemed to go on around the lake, thick and lushly green, but he could not be sure. If there were berries, that they would be in that brush, he felt, and as long as he stayed close to the lake so he could keep the water on his right and know it was there, he wouldn't get lost. Top of page 63. When he was done or found berries, he thought he would just turn around so the water was on his left and walk back until he came to the ridge and his shelter. Simple. Keep it simple. I am Brian Robeson. I have been in a plane crash. I'm going to find some food. I'm going to find berries. He walked slowly, still a bit pained in his joints and weak from hunger, up along the side of the lake. The trees were full of birds singing ahead of him in the sun. Some he knew, some he didn't. He saw a robin and some kind of sparrows, and a flock of reddish-orange birds with thick beaks. 20 or 30 of them were sitting in one of the pines. They made much noise and flew away ahead of him when he walked under the tree. He watched them fly, their color a bright slash in the solid green, and in this way he found the berries. The birds landed in some taller willow type of undergrowth with wide leaves and started jumping and making noise. First he was too far away to see what they were doing, but their color drew him, and he moved toward them, keeping the lake in sight on his right. When he got closer, he saw they were eating berries. He could not believe it was that easy. It was as if the birds had taken him right to the berries. The slender branches went up about 20 feet and, top of page 64, were heavy, drooping with clusters of bright red berries. They were half as big as grapes, but hung in bunches much like grapes. And when Brian saw them glistening red in the sunlight, he almost yelled. His pace quickened, and he was in them in moments, scattering the birds, grabbing branches, stripping them to fill his mouth with berries. He almost spit them out. It wasn't that they were bitter so much as they lacked any sweetness, had a tart flavor that left his mouth dry feeling. And they were like cherries in that they had large pits, which made them hard to chew. But there was so much hunger in him, such an emptiness, that he could not stop, and kept stripping the branches and eating berries by the handful, grabbing and jamming them into his mouth, and swallowing them, pits and all. He could not stop, and when at last his stomach was full, he was still hungry. 2 days without food must have shrunken his stomach, but the drive of the hunger was still there. Thinking of the birds and how they would come back into the berries when he left, he made a carrying pouch of his torn windbreaker and kept picking. Finally, when he judged that he had close to 4 pounds in his jacket, he stopped and went back to his camp by the ridge. Now, he thought, I have some food, and top of 65, I can do something about fixing this place up. He glanced at the sun and saw he had some time before dark. If only I had matches, he thought, looking ruefully at the beach and lakeside. There was driftwood everywhere, not to mention dead and dry wood all over the hill, and dead dry branches hanging from every tree. All firewood and no matches. How did they used to do it, he thought. Rub 2 sticks together? He tucked the berries in the pouch back in under the overhang in the cool shade and found a couple of sticks. After 10 minutes of rubbing, he felt the sticks, and they were almost cool to the touch. Not that, he thought. They didn't do fire that way. He threw the sticks down in disgust. So no fire. But he could still fix the shelter and make it. Here the word safer came into his mind, and he didn't know why. More livable. Kind of close it in, he thought. I'll just close it in a bit. He started dragging sticks up from the lake and pulling long dead branches down from the hill. never getting out of sight of the water and the ridge. With these, he interlaced and wove a wall across the opening of the front of the rock. It took over 2 hours, and he had to stop several times because, top of page 66, he still felt a bit weak, and once because he felt a strange new twinge in his stomach, a tightening, rolling. Too many berries, he thought. I ate too many of them. But it was gone soon, and he kept working until the entire front of the overhang was covered, save a small opening at the right end, nearest the lake. The doorway was about 3 feet. When he went in, he found himself in a room almost 15 feet long and 8 to 10 feet deep, with the rock wall sloping down at the rear. Good, he said, nodding. Good. Outside, the sun was going down, finally, and in the initial coolness, the mosquitoes came out again and clouded in on him. They were thick, terrible, if not quite as bad as the morning, and he kept brushing them off his arms until he couldn't stand it, and then dumped the berries and put the torn windbreaker on. At last, the sleeves covered his arms. Wrapped in the jacket, with darkness coming down fast now, he crawled back in under the rock and huddled and tried to sleep. He was deeply tired and still aching some, but sleep was slowly coming and did not finally settle in until the evening cool turned the night cool and the mosquitoes slowed. Then, at last, with his stomach turning on the berries, Brian went to sleep. So here we see kind of something that looks like Brian's shelter, although not really. He kind of made a wall, like similar to this part, in front of that rock that you saw a couple screens back. So he walls off his shelter. So remember, in Brian's shelter, there's a big rock, and he's under the rock, and he walls off the shelter in front. So this is just kind of a rough picture I found to kind of give you the idea of what Brian did. So in this chapter, hopefully you realize the two things that Brian did. Did you know? What were they? If you said found berries to eat and build his shelter, you were right. If you didn't say that, you were wrong. Okay, well, hopefully you enjoyed that chapter. Now please work on your assignment in Google Classroom, and I'll see you guys soon.